Good morning. Thank you all for coming to our event, Engaging North Korea Through Media, Opportunity and Challenges. It's a pleasure for VOA Korean Service to host this forum. We would like to thank all of our distinguished speakers and our guests for coming down here this morning. Hello, my name is Eun Cho. I'm a reporter with the VOA Korean Service, and I'm also host of VOA Korean Service's weekly discussion show focused solely on North Korea called Washington Talk. I'm going to introduce everybody first and then make a short opening remark and go to the questions. Today we have a great panel that will explore this issue from different angles, and I will make this brief because you have a longer version that we have handed out to you. I will start from the other hand. Mr. Dong-hyuk Lee is the chief of the VOA Korean Service, and since joining VOA, Mr. Lee transformed the VOA Korean Service into a leading outlet for North Korean news, original and breaking, and he's also spearheaded efforts to start a new TV team last year. And next to Mr. Dong-hyuk Lee is Ms. Kang In-sun. She's the Washington bureau chief at the Chosan Ilbo. She's a former member of the editorial board there and was embedded as a war reporter during the war in Iraq in 2003. And at the center is, as we all know, is Ambassador Robert King, is a senior advisor at the CSIS Korea chair. Ambassador King served as special envoy for North Korea human rights issues at the U.S. Department of State from 2009 to 2017. And earlier, Dr. King was staff director of the House Foreign Affairs Committee under Chairman Tom Lantos. And also CSIS, Ms. Marie Dumont is Associate Director and Associate Fellow in the Office of the Korea Chair at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Ms. Dumont is in charge of CSIS public opinion surveys inside North Korea, which is called A View Inside North Korea. And right next to me is Ms. Jin Lee, the Director of Korea Center Program at the Wilson Center. Ms. Lee is a veteran foreign correspondent and is AP's first Pyongyang bureau chief, and she was first American reporter granted extensive access on the ground in North Korea. Welcome to all of you. Let's give them a hand. Now we're just 1 week away from the historic summit between President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The U.S. government is promising economic prosperity and security in exchange for quick denuclearization. Now, amid a flurry of diplomatic activities, there's a question whether North Korea will come out of isolation, engage more with the international world, and are international media ready for this change in North Korea? And we have a panel, great panel here, who will explore this issue from many different angles here today. And today we have, I divided this forum into 3 parts. First, I will ask questions to each panelist, and then we will have an open discussion among the panelists, and then I will open to the floor to receive your questions. Let me move on here. Now, why don't I start with Ambassador Robert King. Ambassador, information control in North Korea speaks to the dire human rights situation in North Korea, and I believe information control was also part of your portfolio as an envoy, right? And I want to ask you, the U.S. government supports not only BBG but also South Korean broadcasters broadcasting into North Korea. So what is U.S. government efforts in putting information into North Korea?
The U.S. government has a number of programs and efforts that have been focused on getting information into North Korea. The backbone of our efforts is the BBG programming, Voice of America, Radio Free Asia. They provide a significant amount of radio broadcasting. They also provide a significant amount of content that is used in other forms, and I think it's particularly important. And that seems to be the key element there. There are also some funding that's provided by the United States government, democracy funding through the Department of State. This has provided funds for non-government organization, NGO broadcasting, primarily from South Korea. In addition, the U.S. government provides funding to the National Endowment for Democracy, which also provides some support. There's some support for content of broadcasting, some support for the physical process of getting the material on the air and getting it into North Korea. But this, I think, is the key elements of what the United States does. And what we do, we try to be aware of what else is going on in terms of broadcasting into North Korea. Clearly, the most important and probably the largest component of broadcasting into North Korea, of information into North Korea, is from South Korea. The South Korean government provides some funding. There's radio broadcasting, there's some television broadcasting, and this is a particularly important element that I think is involved there. We try to be aware of what they're doing. We try to make sure the South Korean government is aware of what we're doing so that what we do is complementary. In addition, there are other broadcasting that goes on, other information programs that are out there. The BBC started a Korean service recently, and there's been some modest amount of broadcasting that the BBC brings. My sense is the more that's out there, the better. It's nice to have options, it's nice to have variety, and when you're trying to get information into a country that's starved for information, more is good. And so I think that's been helpful. In terms of where we stand right now, as significant changes are beginning to take place in terms of at least the relationships with North Korea and South Korea, between North Korea and the United States possibly, I think it's important to think about where we are on these issues. I don't think that broadcasting information policy has changed just because there are some changes in terms of North Korea's willingness to talk or willingness to engage. My sense is that there is very strong support in the United States Congress for information programming going into North Korea. And I think that the support is there, which means the funding is there, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to continue this effort. My hope is that we'll be able to increase the amount, but that's always more difficult. But I think it's important that we continue that effort. In terms of what's happening in North Korea, my sense is the North Korean government has not changed its attitude towards information, towards the importance of its having a monopoly on information. And I don't see North Korea making any significant changes in terms of its efforts to control broadcasting, to limit what reaches people in North Korea. And as euphoric as some of these events may be, I don't think they necessarily presage any kind of change in terms of treatment of policy. The North Koreans are very sophisticated in terms of their blocking mechanisms, and I think they're going to continue to put resources into that, making it more difficult, making it more complicated for us. On the other hand, I think we've been, in the past, willing to face the challenge of North Korea, and I think we need to continue to do that. In terms of the North Korean people who don't have access to outside information, I think there is strong interest in outside information. Some people are interested in news, some people are interested in fashion, some people are interested in drama. I think that's going to continue. The one thing that I think may be significant is that in times of political change, there is always an increased interest in news and in trying to get information about what's going on. If I can date myself, I began when I finished graduate school at Radio Free Europe, in the days when Radio Free Europe was broadcasting to Central Europe. I was in Munich at the headquarters of Radio Free Europe in December of 1970. Most of you were not even alive at that time. But in December of 1970, there was a sudden, unannounced increase in prices in Poland. Foodstuffs went up, this kind of thing. All of a sudden, everybody wanted to know what was going on. 62 people were killed in riots that took place. A large number of people were injured. Police were called out. Martial law was declared. Radio Free Europe was a major broadcaster to Poland during this time. And during the time of this unrest in December of 1970. Radio Free Europe's listenership in Poland skyrocketed. 80% of people listening regularly to Radio Free Europe to find out what was going on inside their country. Now, I can see this maybe not so dramatic an effect taking place in North Korea as North Koreans become aware of changes that are taking place elsewhere. And they will get, even through their own media, some indications of what's going on, but there will likely be greater interest in terms of what other people are thinking about what is going on. And I see this as a time when the importance of information, when access to information is more important than it's ever been. But I think these are important considerations in terms of where we are and where we're moving. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Very extensive. And I will now move on to Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, you've been with VOA for more than a decade, and before that you've been with RFA for many years as senior editor there. So tell us about U.S. media putting information into North Korea.
Well, I'd like to limit my conversation to what we do as a broadcaster under the BBG programming. There are two broadcasts, basically, VOA Korean and Radio Free Asia Korean. VOA Korean has 7 hours of radio broadcasting every day, and RFA Korean has 6 hours of radio broadcasting every day. VOA is trying to target North Korean elites with news and information about U.S. foremost and the world. I mean, we do way more than that, but if I put in one sentence, I think that would be the core sort of a mission of what we do as a VOA Korean. We are using medium wave signals and short wave signals. Both are quite powerful. And we don't have many opportunities, but we do sometimes have a very rare opportunities to send people in North Korea as a part of a tour coverage or as part of other purposes. And we have some anecdotes from them, and they tell us that the reception is really loud and clear. So I think we are depending on radio for quite a bit for many, many years, and I think it's still very viable and effective delivery means for VOA and RFA Korean. Early last year, we really did something dramatic. It was a brand new effort. And it's a sort of an experimental effort, but still it's a very important first solid step toward exploring potential new platform, and that is the television. We launched the VOA and RFA both launched the video production team, and VOA has launched 7 programs, some documentary program, feature programs. And then we have a very important 2 news programs. One is Anjung is actually hosting weekly panel discussion, which is quite popular among all the pundits and the North Korea experts in this town. Not only that, it is gaining a lot of viewership on YouTube and some other means too. That particular program is on satellite too. So we are making brand new efforts, and I think I'll have some opportunity to touch upon this topic again, but maybe in later discussion. And we are quite hopeful about the potential opportunities in North Korea.
Just a quick follow-up. So what is the value of VOA, and why should North Koreans listen or watch VOA?
Yeah, I'll be brief and quick. I think there are about 6 major players or 7 major players trying to target, trying to serve North Koreans. And obviously, we are one of the major players in the market. We are focusing on, the United States and America in general. With all these developments between, Pyongyang and Seoul, and the renewed diplomacy between Washington and Pyongyang on the nuclear issue, I think give us an opportunity and some type of a potential for North Korea to engage with the world and the U.S. for that matter. And in that process, I think VOA can play a critical role in informing North Korean elites and other people in the country, for that matter, about the U.S. U.S. government policies, and let's say, for example, an ordinary American citizen, how he or she thinks about North Korean, what is going on in the country. So I think we're in the business of informing them, and so that they can make a informed decision about the future of the country and the future relationship with the United States.
And speaking about major players, Ms. In Sang-gang's daily 조선일보 is the largest in South Korea, and she will tell us about South Korean efforts. So since President Moon Jae-in, he came into power a year ago, and since President Moon came into power, how has government support to South Korean broadcasters changed?
I don't think, that much changes after Moon Jae-in has come to office. So maybe let me start with my experience. Actually, while I was in Korea, I knew that there was something going on about this South Korean broadcasting into North Korea, but I have never heard about that. So last night, for this forum, I just chose one of those YouTube things and listened to that, and to my surprise, it was quite funny. There was a lot diverse programs are in that programs, like how to speak Seoulite, like people in Seoul. So all those current affairs, it's news, it's weather and sports, and of course K-pop, and so many things are in that big pool. So I was pretty much impressed by that. So I looked one North Korean refugee who now works for 조선일보. He's a reporter in Korea, in 조선일보. So I called him. So have you ever heard about this while you were in North Korea? And he said, of course, I was addicted to that. So it was kind of eye-opening thing for me. So just tell me about your experience. So what he said was that in North Korea, it's an isolated country, as you know. So there's nothing much you can get from TV or radio in North Korea, which is all state, kind of propaganda type of things. So it was very boring. There's nothing much you can get out of that. But once you started listening to this radio from outside world, he said it was so fun. So you cannot just stop listening to that radio. So wow. So how about, actually he escaped the country 2000. So how about now? Do you think the same thing happened in North Korea now? And he said, of course, it's still there. People still love that one. So what is the means that he could listen, they could listen to all these radio programs? And he said he bought a radio in black market. And these days, they have a better, technically more developed radio now, mostly from China. It's easier for them to get access to that radio programs. So I just checked all the radio stations in Korea, and then KBS has a major force in that area, I think. So they have, we call that 한민족 방송, which is Korean Nation Broadcasting. So I just checked all the programs they are producing these days, and they have do programs like 20 hours a day, and they have 17 producers there, and they are making like 28 programs a week, so which is all different things. So, but there are KBS it's a kind of public type of a thing, and there are other radio stations run by National Intelligence Service and Ministry of Defense. So those are something that you can expect what they are trying to convey. And then the last part is at a private level, which is mostly run by North Korean human rights groups. So they also have a very big impact on the contents and everything. But the major changes they have found these days is that after Inter-Korean Summit on April 27th, actually there was a kind of a tendency that they tried to avoid, severe criticism against, the North Korean regime. But that's more in KBS and which is a state-run media. But the other side of all those North Korean human rights group-based radio station, I think they are not affected by that trend. But when you look at the history of these broadcasting into North Korean, there's a trend in line with the government policy position toward North Korea. So, that's what people have observed, that there's a kind of a similarity in that there. Yeah.
Just a quick follow-up, because I wasn't expecting ever since Moon Jae-in president came into power, there isn't much change because there's this reconciliatory move, and people would expect that the South Korean government would kind of want to deter the North Korean broadcasting into North Korea. So why do you think there is no change then?
No, I wouldn't say no change, but it's not like now it's a Moon Jae-in era, so let's just stop something and let's do something new. It's not like that. The changes are just embedded in the new trend. So as I told you, like after inter-Korean talks, it's a little bit different, and then people may feel that kind of changes, but it's not like policy decision type of things. That's what I meant to say.
I see. And right next to me is Ms. Jean Lee. She's also a veteran journalist, and now she's a Korea expert at the Wilson Center. And she was the AP's first Pyongyang bureau chief until 2013. And Chairman Kim Jong-un came to power in 2011, so she was there to see all the transition there. And I want to ask you about the Kim Jong-un regime and its control, information control. Ever since Chairman Kim Jong-un came into power, has the information control got more stronger as opposed to his father Kim Jong-il?
There's so many interesting things that I want to respond to with what you've said, but actually I have seen a significant change in how the regime considers foreign content. This is a regime that has portrayed its leader as somebody who embraces the modern world, embraces science and technology. There's been so much promotion of information technology. The cell phone network, for example, is one thing that I think has had vast impact in terms of how North Koreans can communicate. That said, and I will get into some details about what I've seen on the ground, that said, I have not seen a significant change in terms of the loosening of control over the flow of information. So although North Korea is more open to outside information, they still want to have very tight control over what their people see, read, and hear. And so, but I will talk a little bit about what I'm seeing on the ground. I have to say that they do listen to VOA. Every time I was in North Korea, they mentioned any time I was mentioned in VOA. So it does tell us that the elites, there are certain people who have permission to access the internet or to listen, and their jobs are to listen to VOA and to monitor foreign content, anything that's being written about North Korea. I think it's interesting. When I was opening the AP office inside KCNA, I did ask them, people often ask me, did they censor your work? And I said, well, that was a red line. I told them, you can't see anything. I can't let you see what it is I'm sending out before it goes on the wire. But you're perfectly welcome to Google us afterward. And they did. And I did once ask them to take me to the room where they have internet access so they could see what I was doing. And so there is a room inside KCNA where they can monitor foreign content. And what it reminded me of was years ago I made a trip to Joseonilbo, and there was a room inside Joseonilbo where journalists who had special permission to monitor North Korean content were also in a locked room reading KCNA. So the lack of flow information goes both ways, I think.
I myself never been there.
No, it was very similar. You have to have permission. We have a national security law in South Korea that does prevent us from accessing North Korean media, right? And I did hope that that would change under President Moon. I do hope that we'll have more access to information about North Korea because it does help us understand the country better. Now, I want to talk about the cell phone network. This is such an incredibly powerful tool to have a 3G network in North Korea. The idea that people can pick up a phone, those who can afford it, those who have access to one, can pick up a phone and call somebody in another city and exchange information. At the time when I first got to North Korea, and I've been going there for 10 years, was powerful. They were so used to getting information that the concept of being able to ask for information was very new to them. I think this is a very powerful tool that you're giving the people. That said, it's a divided network. Again, as with everything else in North Korea, as a foreigner, I had the ability to call my colleagues. I could call my sister in Brooklyn. I could call my office in Beijing. I could not call South Korea, and I could not call my North Korean colleagues. The North Koreans, I got them cell phones. I bought them cell phones, but they could not call me. So that division between foreigners and locals still remains. But, so their cell phones, they could subscribe to the party newspaper, Nodong Shinmun, and receive updates on their cell phones through their intranet. I could not. I actually tried to subscribe, but I could, through the 3G network, access the newspaper through our World Wide Web. So there is the separation, right? I was able to access the World Wide Web from my cell phone in North Korea. They were able to access their intranet, so vetted by their government. Now, there were a few other things that I saw happen. The introduction of the PC, the tablet PC, which they call the iPad. I had to tell them that not all tablet PCs are made by Apple, as much as you want an Apple iPad. But that device, if any of you have ever used one, is loaded with content. It is also loaded with American content and foreign content that is vetted by the government. I should also mention that during my time there, we saw the introduction of, I should say, the resurrection of an educational channel that showed foreign content 3 times a week. One day it was English language programming, lots of Disney cartoons, and that is actually that is the only sanctioned American content that I've seen. And we have seen, some of you may have seen the broadcast of some Disney characters who are prancing around on stage on state TV. So we do see Disney characters quite a bit. That's the only sanctioned American content that I think I've seen. One day a week they have Chinese content, and one day a week they have Russian content. Now, it wasn't unusual for me on a weekend to turn the TV on in Pyongyang and see foreign movies. So I saw everything from Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon to Russian soap operas. So just remember that there is some foreign content. It's just that the regime wants to control it. Along with foreign content on devices and TV, these e-libraries that we're seeing opening up at Kim Il-sung University, at the Grand People's Study House, at the new Science and Technology Center that is shaped like an atom. It's amazing what kind of things I've seen students viewing on the computers at those centers, everything from tutorials on how to play golf to cartoons. All of it is foreign content that I've seen, but vetted by the regime. So there is a hunger for foreign content and more of an acceptance by the regime that they can learn from it, but they want to make sure that they have control over it. And I'm just going to, there was one thing that I noticed when I was watching the new educational TV channel, and I'm going to make sure that, I just want to make sure I get this quote right. I did see this quote posted outside the e-library at Kim Il-sung University. So this is a quote from Kim Jong-il, supposedly or reportedly made in 2009. So during this period that I call the succession era, when they were grooming Kim Jong-un and really laying the groundwork for his leadership, keep your feet firmly planted in this land and look out over the world. And I thought that was so interesting. So it's like telling their students, you need to be aware of what's happening in the rest of the world, but remember your roots. Remember that you are Korean and always choose the Korean way of doing things. But go ahead and learn from the outside world. But they are clearly uncomfortable with giving them complete access. They still want to control it. They still want to make sure that it falls into line with their ideology and the regime's priorities.
Just a quick follow-up. As with many other issues involving North Korea, I see these very conflicting signals from the Kim Jong-un regime. Is that Kim Jong-un wants to develop the economy and do trade with the outside world. At the same time, Kim Jong-un regime is tightly controlling the border. So how are these two factors factoring into the information control?
I think we're going to go into a very tricky period when it comes to economic partnership and engagement because on the one hand, North Korea wants the investment, but they understand also that opening up opens them up to outside influence, and that is very dangerous. So I think we're going to see, I don't think we're going to see a sort of wide-scale openness. We're going to see them saying, listen, yes, we want your money, but everyone's going to be very careful inside North Korea about the danger the influence from foreign companies or foreign entities is going to put them under. So it's a very tricky, you have to remember that for North Koreans, having any contact with outsiders also puts them at risk because they have to pay attention to whether it looks as though they've been influenced by foreigners and that their way of thinking may have been converted by these foreigners. So they're always very conscious of it. So I think we need to be aware that this era of openness is largely propaganda, and that when it comes down to the logistics, they're going to be very careful about how much they let in.
Right. And Marie Dumont from CSIS, she's the associate director there, and she's in charge of this public survey inside of North Korea. What they do is they survey the North Koreans still living inside North Korea. And they did an interesting survey last year. It's called Information and Its Consequences in North Korea. So Marie, tell us about this survey. How much foreign information did the North Koreans consume, and what were the consequences?
Yeah, so first, just to give a little more context on the survey, it's a micro survey, so we talked to 36 people. Because access to North Korea is difficult, and because of the safety considerations with sharing opinions and stuff, we used a survey method called a sampling of convenience. So I just want to make sure everyone knows you have to be really careful when you start scaling that up to the whole country. But just speaking about the 36 people we spoke to, about 92% of them, or 33 of them, said that they access foreign media at least once a month. When we looked at whether they were near the border or they were in provinces that were further away, that really didn't matter. Where they were located didn't seem to influence how often they were able to access it. So geography, that said to us, geography wasn't causing a hindrance to the flow of information. They could access it anywhere in the country, and this we know from surveys and testimony from people who have since left North Korea and are living in other countries. When you talk to them, they say people share information through a person-to-person network or in markets, which is a big place where they will get the cell phones or the DVDs or access to radios. So that is that can be accessed throughout the whole country. While access does seem to be available, and quite a number of people seem to be using it quite frequently, there are significant consequences to accessing outside information that's not allowed. We heard a lot about how they're carefully controlling it. In the 2014, the UN Commission of Inquiry found that there were grave human rights abuses around the control of outside information, and that type of information are things such as South Korean dramas and radio broadcast telephones, not necessarily things you would typically consider as seditious material, but nonetheless strictly controlled. Some North Korean laws, one for example, it says that if you're found possessing culturally inappropriate content or distributing it, you can receive anywhere between 3 to 15 years in a labor camp. Some other escapees have testified that particularly sensitive information, such as some South Korean dramas or items like the Christian Bible, that can result in a death sentence. And so that doesn't happen for all types of media or for all people, but the consequences for accessing this type of information can be very grave.
And how often did they, how did the foreign media being integrated into their daily lives?
Yeah, so like I said, the majority of them, 92%, accessed at least once a month. 6 of the people that we talked to accessed it every day, which is impressive. I do not access foreign media every day. So this is a big part of their lives. 12 of them said they accessed it at least once a week, and then the 15 remaining said that they had accessed it at least once a month. So something that they are regularly going to. We didn't ask them specifically what type of foreign media they are accessing, so this could be entertainment type things, dramas, TV shows, K-pop, or it could be more informational news or current events, weather reports. So we didn't ask them exactly what. Interestingly, of the ones who had accessed, 32 of them said that they found the information from the outside world that they had accessed to be actually useful for their daily lives. So it wasn't something that they weren't interested in or wasn't something that they found use for, but they actually found the outside information to be quite useful for their daily lives.
All right. I've already gained so much insight listening from these great speakers for the half an hour. Why don't we move on to our second segment, which will be an open discussion. I will give out a question, and then we will have free discussion among the panelists. Just a quick announcement that this program is being live streamed at www.insidevoa.com and is also live on satellite right now. I'll move on to the second segment and give out the first question. So what are the prospects of Kim Jong-un regime opening up more to the outside world after that big event a week later, the meeting between President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un? Should we start with Jean?
I really hope that as part of this coming out process where he's emerging as he's trying to create this image that he's an international statesman, that he actually engages with the press. I'm very curious to see whether he will do as his grandfather did. We know his father didn't engage with the foreign press, but I'm hoping that his grandfather will. His grandfather did meet with and give interviews with foreign media, so I'm kind of hoping that, and I do expect that in the coming weeks and months that we will see him give his first international interview with the foreign media. But yes, I mean, if things go well, we could see a lot of change. We could see this usher in a period of quite a bit of change when it comes to how the North Korean leader interacts with the press and with the outside world.
Well, actually, I have a quick comments and question. I do believe with these latest developments, and we certainly hope that there might be some increased opportunities for North Korea and as a matter of fact, the world to engage with each other. And you believe, Jean, in the process, there are potentials, but North Korean government will do whatever it can actually to put maybe tighter control or at least to place the system that they've been using in place. They want to ensure that that system is still in place. So what's your bet? Do you think there will be some potentials for engagement, and in that engagement that could open up the country a little bit, or we will have to see pretty much a status quo that we've been witnessing so far for many, many decades?
The North Koreans have been very good at controlling engagement. They've been there have been a number of groups that have been engaging the North Koreans for years, and they're very good at controlling the depth of that engagement. So, and I don't think that will change. Even I do think it was significant that I was allowed to open a bureau there. I did go in at a period when I saw that North Korea was seeking to reach out to the United States. That said, I've seen a real scale back in how much access foreign media have been allowed subsequently. I should mention that AFP was allowed to open a bureau there, which is good, but we're still, frankly, not seeing better access for foreign media on the ground. They're very good at managing and controlling engagement. And I think that it will require any of their partners, the South Koreans or whoever it is who goes in to work with them, to really push the envelope and really push the North Koreans to loosen up. It's going to be a challenge. I don't think anyone should go in thinking that they're going to be so much more open. They're going to continue to exert control over those relationships.
If I could make a comment, one of the things that I think is likely to happen is there will be this continued effort to control access to information, what information is provided, and so forth. At the same time, when you start certain amounts of information flowing into an area, or when people find out things, it has a very expansive effect. And the one thing that the studies that have been done on information inside North Korea is the impact of people talking to each other, the use of the cell phones that Jean mentioned. I think once information starts going into North Korea, once there's some increased access, that kind of is the wedge that will press and make it easier for other information to get in, and the information that does get in will be circulated more broadly. I think it's a slippery slope for the North Koreans, and I'm delighted that it is, because I think there's something to be said for this access to information. I think it'll happen.
There are a couple different channels. There is the illicit way of sending information in, which we've talked about, but there's also the sanctioned way of sending information. And I just wanted to mention that Asia Foundation has a program where they send books in on a regular basis, American books, into North Korea. That's a sanctioned route of providing information. Likewise, I negotiated the right to bring in information as the bureau chief. This is another sanctioned route to information. There are ways to bring information in that will not get the locals in trouble, and that's something to keep in mind as well, that we need to be trying to find ways to bring information into the country using both channels.
And one of the problems that U.S. policy has had by restricting access to North Korea, we are limiting our opportunities
Absolutely.
to get information into North Korea. Americans should be able to travel there, not for the Pyongyang Marathon, but for other things where there's more meaningful engagement with North Koreans.
And on that note, I'm quite curious, because we have so much attention focused on this upcoming summit, will the summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un some kind of be a big trigger for more opening up of North Korea and more information into North Korea?
I may add some opinion. Actually, I read a very interesting article about what the North Korean elites who are working abroad reacted to the cancellation of President Trump's summit. So when the news was known, they got to know that news that the summit might be canceled, and they were so frustrated because they wanted to have something new happen in their country too. So we don't know what the U.S. DPRK summit will eventually lead us to, but they also have that kind of hope, something that they haven't thought would happen in their country. And then one of the North Korean defector I talked to last night, and he told me that even though you are a dictator in your country, in North Korea, there are people, there are younger people who wanted to something changing, something new. So as long as there's that kind of hope there, you need to do something to entertain them. I think it's a whole different way of thinking. So maybe, we need to adjust ourselves to a new situation. But I don't think that kind of a thing is going to happen not by Kim Jong-un's decision, but by the developments of the situation. That's what I thought. Yeah.
Just quick follow-up. I think your question is sort of related to the first question we sort of tried to answer. And I think I have two things. One, as Ambassador King put it earlier, I think all these political developments do create some type of potential for the need for more news and information inside the country. That's the number one factor. Second, I think there's always a risk to the point of a regime. There's always chance of unintended consequences or some sort of repercussion. Whether the regime likes it or not, as it's trying to engage with the outside world, I think it also increases, the chance for the need in the country and sort of pressure, I guess, on the regime to allow more freedom. Allowing domestic mobile phones has been viewed as, by some experts, as the regime's effort to satisfy some of the needs of the elites. So I think we also have to consider the quote-unquote unintended consequences of this opening up. Yeah.
I want to move on to the next question. So what should be the role of South Korean government and the U.S. government in future endeavors in putting information into North Korea? Ambassador King. You can start.
The first thing is that they should work together. It seems to me that we are much more successful if we're cooperating. And we have had, during the time that I was the special envoy, we had a very good relationship with the South Korean government. And I think that it's important that both sides see this as an effort that we're both engaged in. The South Koreans are better at seeing it that way than Americans, who are sort of used to elbowing their way into wherever they want to go. But I think that South Korea has a great deal to offer, and I think the cooperation makes a big difference in terms of what we do.
I'll just make one quick comment. I think Seoul has the advantage of being close enough to North Korea, and it has a lot of political and economic influence as well. U.S. does have a potential leverage, but I don't think it's an influence yet. So I think, as Dr. King suggested, there got to be some sort of a close coordination between the two allies here.
But I want to point out that South Korea, the South Koreans have not had much access over the past 10 years because of the hardline policies of the two previous administrations. So I find over the past 10 years that South Koreans probably know less about North Korea than many other of the partners in the region because they've had so little access. And so I do try to encourage South Koreans to work with. There's sometimes a feeling that, well, we're Koreans, so we know this issue best, and we should be leading the way, but also talk to partners in Europe and the United States who have had access, or in Southeast Asia or China, Russia, because you have not. So that's something that we need to consider, is that South Koreans have not had much interaction over the past 10 years.
And I think one of the problems with South Korea is that the political swings
back and forth,
tend to go back and
whiplash.
forth. And at least in the United States on this issue, we tend to be fairly consistent from regime to regime. One of the few issues, the passage of the North Korean Human Rights Act extension by the House of Representatives this year, passed with only 2 dissenting votes. I think it's probably one of the few pieces of legislation that made it through the House this year without major hassle.
Well, if I add some Korean side of the story, I think we need to raise some awareness that we need to send more information to North Korea. It's very simple. But as I told you, I have been living in Korea, but I have never thought of whether we are doing this kind of thing. I mean, there's broadcasting into North Korea, which I said I knew something was going on, but I didn't really knew what was really going on. So if we care more about what we need to do, then that will be more helpful. I mean, for example, we had a loudspeaker thing, which is more like a psychological word things. Well, I saw some YouTube things. They analyzed the contents that the loudspeakers tried to convey them. So what was the best reaction from North Koreans? I don't know whether it's confirmed or not, but the first one is weather report, because the North Koreans who are living in that area, who can listen to their loudspeakers, they are living in a very isolated situation. So weather report is very valuable information for them. So those kind of experience, experience and information, then we may develop, our way of just going into North Korea in a more efficient way.
Yeah, Ms. Kang just mentioned about weather, and I do wanted to ask Marie about this and open up to other speakers here as well. What kind of contents should we focus on?
Yeah, so in our surveys and also when you talk to escapees who have since left, across the spectrum of society, they are interested in the full spectrum of content. Some, particularly now, as there's a lot of changes, talks of the summit and opening, would be important to share with them what are we doing and what do we see as the situation. So one gentleman in particular, I recall, said something along the lines of he was actually interested in international politics and U.S. North Korea relations because it impacted prices in the market, and he wanted to know what that was going to be so he could anticipate that in his activities. So there's going to be the demand from them, but also making sure that they're getting a clear message on what it is we're actually, the rest of the world is thinking on these topics. One brief story that I found particularly striking, one woman, we were not necessarily asking her about information or foreign media consumption, but we asked her, what do you think of North Korea's nuclear weapons program? And she said she didn't like it because it was against international law. I would venture to bet that she did not learn that from a domestic source. She got it from foreign information. And so even on topics like international law, there's at least one person in North Korea who would be interested in hearing that kind of content.
However, I should point out that there is a movie called The Country I Saw, and I happened to it was on TV when I was in North Korea, and there had just been, I think, a ballistic missile launch by North Korea, and my crew and I, my North Korean staff and I were having dinner, and we saw on TV a UN Security Council meeting, and we all jumped up because we thought that the Security Council had issued another resolution, but it was actually a movie. So so then we sat down and realized, oh, this is a movie. So there is state-sanctioned content that does show that they violated UN Security Council. So they actually are aware that this is a violation. They just phrase it and package it differently. So there is some state-sanctioned content that does show the missile program as an act of defiance.
I do want to give my audience some chance to ask you questions. Just a quick announcement that this is being live streamed at www.insidevoa.com and also being live streamed over the satellite. Who would like to give questions? When you do, please raise your hand. Please tell us who you are, who you're affiliated with, and tell us who you want to direct the question to. And actually, our team wants you to step up to the floor and give questions.
Hi, my name is Abdul. I'm a PhD student at Florida International and working with BBG as an intern. So my question is for Marie. You talked about you conducted the survey. So I was just curious, what does this tell us about the larger population in North Korea?
Well, based solely on the survey we conducted, we wouldn't want to make assumptions about all of North Korea. It does help to see what people living in North Korea are thinking. So we got statements from people who are actually still living there. A way that we like to analyze the information and try and make broader implications is by looking at what other escapees, defectors in other countries are saying. And for the most part, it is along the same lines. Now, of course, defectors and escapees, they do not necessarily represent the entire country. They've already voted with their feet and left the country. So they're not necessarily representative of the entire population either, but you do start seeing a bigger picture by talking to people who are currently in the country, people who've gotten to travel there, and in combination with those to kind of get a sense of what are people actually thinking as they're living there now.
We're waiting for another question. Yes, Mr. Tokoda.
Yeah, I'm Mark Tokel of the Korea Economic Institute. My question is really for anyone. If you could put one or two items on the list of U.S. asks or requests for the upcoming summit, what would you ask North Korea to do?
There's so many. Where do we begin?
Are you specifically talking about the broadcasting efforts outside to? Well, I would ask the regime to allow us a bureau in Pyongyang.
Well, you might have to ask the U.S. Treasury to alleviate some of the sanctions.
I
that
know
we're
you've
from-
dealt with a lot of things, and that's why I need to talk to you.
For me, my big ask would be to allow the people to have internet access. I think that that would be a big step toward giving them access to information and showing that you are ready to join the rest of the world in giving your people the freedom to information.
I think I would echo what Jeannie just said. I think that might be the most closest thing you can imagine or speculate in terms of the regime trying to make efforts to ease a little bit of restriction on its information, control. Yeah.
The difficulty of dealing with the context in which these issues are going to be raised is that there's a lot of distrust on both sides. And just as the Libya model is not likely to be a way that's going to solve the problem of nuclear weapons, I think when we look at information, we've got to be careful not to take a Libya approach as well. We need to sort of wedge the door open a little bit at first, and the more we open the door, the easier it's going to be to push it further. My sense is that any kind of activities that involve engagement between North Koreans and Americans, in particular looking at our situation, and the same thing I think is true with South Koreans as well, is going to be helpful. Access to information, I don't think they're going to start by allowing access to the internet, but they might start by allowing the Pyongyang Symphony to come to New York, and by having some kind of exchanges. There's an advantage in bringing a symphony orchestra to the United States. In the first place, most security officials don't play violin, which means you're going to get 100 people here who aren't security people. Now, they will be surrounded by security people, but these are people who are going to get an impression of what the United States is like. And I think what we've got to do is look at some modest steps that we can take and push the door a little bit open, and then we can kind of elbow our way in later.
Next question? Yes.
Resai Poch from the Khmer Service at VOA. I know this is very early stage and the summit has not taken place yet, but in the long run, does anybody, any of you think that reunification is possible?
I mean, anything is possible in that way. Well, it's for me, it's like your country is divided, so something needs to be, because it's somewhere in the middle. So I think it should be fulfilled. That's what I felt like. So, but I don't know whether the U.S. DPRK Summit will lead us to the reunification eventually, but if it goes well, and so that we can just open the door more open, of the North Korea to outside the world, and then I think it's a very important step toward that, that goal.
I lived in Germany for 7 years, and during the time that I lived in Germany, Germany was divided. I did not expect in my lifetime to see unification take place. And when it came, it was not something that was planned out and thought out and worked out very carefully. It was an accident, and it happened. I was in Berlin 1 week after the wall came down. I was at Rosenheimer Platz as they started pulling out the concrete slabs that had formed the wall. There's a possibility. How we do it, I'm not sure. And I'm not sure that people looking at Germany in 1988